Hello, everyone. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. I am Paul Merrill. I'm from Beaufort Fairmont Test Automation Services. We focus on test automation for software applications. We do training, consulting, and we have dedicated experts that can help you with your test automation needs. Today, I'm really excited to be hosting my friend Joe Colantonio. And if you don't know Joe, you're going to get a chance to know him. Joe hosted a podcast and continues to host a podcast that has been called Test Talks. It's getting renamed, and he's going to tell us a little bit about that as we get started here. But today, Joe is going to tell us about the state of automation in 2020. So once again, if you're just joining us, I'm Paul Merrill. We're going to have Joe on in just a moment. You may even be able to see him on a screen. Wave if you can do that. And folks, just a couple points of order as we get started here. You'll notice that you have a place to chat in your interface there for GoToWebinar. Feel free to chat amongst yourselves or what else. I'll keep an eye on that as we go along. Feel free to type in questions as we go. So Joe's going to stop and take questions as we go if he's able to. And if there's a slide or something like that that you want to talk about, write your question then. We'll have some questions at the end as well. Sometimes that typing of questions takes a little while, so go ahead and get started as soon as you have them. I appreciate everybody being here today. This is going to be a fun talk. I'm always interested in where automation is, and Joe will know very well because he is constantly working with folks in the industry, including people who work in test automation and who research test automation and things like that. So he is well connected, and he's gonna have a clear understanding of where things are going. His Twitter handle is right there at Joe Colantonio, and please follow him on Twitter. And I'm happy to give you all of his contact information that he wants to share later on. So it is 12 o'clock here on the East Coast, so let's get started. Some of you know I have the B list. The B list is for B for Beaufort Fairmont. And I like to thank people. I like to make sure that people know that I appreciate what they've done for me, what they've done for the business. And these are a few folks that have been great lately, and I really appreciate what you did. If you talked to me lately or you interacted with us in some way, and it looks like, hey, my name's Mario and last name starts with an L. That's probably you, okay? So thank you very much for whatever you've done. Sometimes it's as little as a retweet. Sometimes it's just saying something nice, and all those things are fuel to get going. Sometimes it's customers, sometimes it's other things. So thank you very much for whatever you did there. And congratulations for making the B list. So STPCon is coming up. It's next week. It's in Boston. I can't wait. I love STPCon. Every year, I love going to STPCon. They do an East Coast version. They do a West Coast version. I'll be speaking on refactoring. And you may have noticed a couple things out recently. I had a podcast out with STPCon. So if you look up the Software Test Professionals website or look up STP podcast, something along those lines, a recent episode featured yours truly talking with Mark Tomlinson. I was so thankful to be on there and to be able to speak about something that I love, refactoring. The reason that I was doing that, and I wrote an article in Tech Beacon lately, TECH Beacon, BEACON. If you go out onto Tech Beacon, you'll see my refactoring article, and all that is leading up to my talk at STPCon, and I'm looking forward to it. It's one of my favorite talks. The idea is I'll be sharing with people the idea of refactoring. We hear it all the time. We hear developers say these things, use this word, and do we really know what it means? And if we don't have a programming background, how are we supposed to figure out what it means? So what I've done is I've put together examples in things that we can all understand, things that any tester, test automation person, program manager, project manager, business analyst, anybody can really understand and look at and see techniques that are very similar to refactoring. And I've gone into the basics of what refactoring is, the fundamentals, the definition of refactoring. I will spend time going through all of that in Boston, and I'm looking forward to as many folks being there as you can. You may have noticed there's a 10% off for STPCon if you use this code, BEAUFAIR. That's BOFAIR, BEAUFAIR, 10% off for STPCon. And in October, I'll be doing the webinar. So I've got some new material I'm going to be going through on here. Don't miss October. I don't have a date for that yet, but it's coming soon. you all know we do an Amazon gift card giveaway, a $50 Amazon gift card giveaway. I love being able to do this. I know for myself, anytime I go into my account for Amazon and I notice an extra $50 there that I got for doing something or for just someone being nice for some reason, I love seeing that. And it's fun to spend. It's nice going on Audible and getting some new books or getting a new movie, renting a movie, whatever else. So stick around to the end of the webinar for your chance to have that same feeling. Today we have Joe Colantonio with us. Joe is the founder of Test Guild, a blog, podcast, and online conferences dedicated to helping you succeed with all things software testing related, including automation, performance, and security. Joe is a huge helper in this industry. He is really a great member of the community here. He does some great things like Automation Guild, Performance Guild. If you haven't been to those virtual online conferences, make sure to look into them. And Joe is with us now. Joe, welcome.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Paul. Great intro.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about your recent rebrand?
Sure. So I have a habit of creating multiple websites with multiple names. And so it became really hard to maintain. And people were getting confused that they knew I had a blog, but they didn't know I had a podcast, or I had a podcast, they didn't know I had a blog, or they didn't know I had conferences. So I wanted to launch another podcast, and I didn't want to have another website for that podcast. So what I did is I rebranded everything under Test Guild. So rather than joecolantonio.com or Test Talks, it's now going to be Test Guild. And I have a podcast that used to be Test Talks. And so that's been rebranded as Test Guild Automation Podcast. And I just started another podcast on performance testing, which I'm calling the Test Guild Performance Podcast. So trying to make it so as I grow, I can keep the name, keep one site, and so people won't get confused, one resource to go to.
But we're not losing Test Talks, right? I mean, it's got a new name, but it's still there.
Exactly the same. Everything's the same except new name, new intros, same sponsor, same automation awesomeness people are used to, for sure.
Same automation awesomeness.
Yeah.
If you haven't been a part of the podcast or Automation Guild or Performance Guild or one of these, this is a signature Joe Colantonio branding. Automation awesomeness. Very, very cool. So Joe, I'm going to make you the presenter, and we're going to get started talking about the state of test automation in 2020.
Cool.
So here we go.
1 second. All right, Paul, are you able to see my screen?
I'm looking. Sometimes my windows get messed up here. Yes, I am.
Awesome.
Your screen, and it's showing me all of the slides on the side, the thumbnails and things. So it's not a presentation. Okay.
So I'm gonna take myself off video because I'm in an Airbnb. I'm not in my normal place right now, so I have bad internet. So I'm gonna take off my video and I'll come back during questions, and I'll just jump into the slides. So if you have any questions during the slides, you have a point that's pertinent to that particular slide, just jump in and let me know. Oh, sorry, Paul, 1 second. Okay, so what I'm calling this is basically what happens is every year I do a survey, and then I create a blog article on my 7 predictions for the new year. So I thought it'd be kind of fun, since we're getting near 2020 now, to look at the predictions I made for the 2019 blog post, and then see how close I got, and then see maybe any carryover that might happen in 2020. As Paul mentioned, I have a podcast. So I've interviewed over 270 folks on Test Talks. So I'm constantly speaking with folks on what they're dealing with, what they're struggling with, what they're working on. And that really helps me to get informed into what's happening in the industry. And I also get to go to conferences and then speak with the vendors themselves. And then they give me the roadmap of what they're looking at and what they're seeing as well. So I try to take all that information, put it together, and share it with you. So hopefully you get some benefit out of it. All right, so the first thing I do is I like to do a survey before every conference. And in that survey, the first question I ask is, what's your biggest challenge? So I thought it would be fun to start off just looking at the biggest challenges people said they struggled with in 2019 for the 2019 conference, and then compare that against the 2020 that I just released recently, that survey, and see if there's any similarities or people still struggling with the same thing. And like I said, what this does, this helps me get a feel or a pulse for what people are struggling with. And a lot of times what people are struggling with, if everyone's struggling with the same thing, vendors will try to fill in that gap usually, or an open source solution may try to fill in the gap if they say, hey, looks like everyone's struggling with flaky tests. What can we do to make tests more reliable? So that's what I like to do to get a feel for what people are struggling with. And then based on that, kind of get an idea for what I think vendors or people are going to work on in open source space to fill those needs. So this is the 2019. Nothing really shocking here. If you've done automation for any amount of time, you've probably seen or struggled with similar things. You see flaky tests, speed, integration, performance, UI test, AI, continuous testing. All these types of things are popping up that people said they were struggling with when I did this survey at the end of 2019 for the 2019 survey. And so here's the 2021. And you notice it's the same type of things, same type of things are popping out. Really, I don't see much difference. The only difference I may gather from this is that the previous one, it seemed like people were just maybe getting into automation or starting off the efforts. And this year, I'm kind of getting a feel for people all right, they're starting to implement automation now, but now they're starting to struggle with things like how to get it more reliable in their pipeline, right? How to get it more reliable in their CI/CD systems, how to get more ROI with their teams, how to get team buy-in. So it seems like, the previous year, more folks were just starting to get into automation. This year to me, it feels like more folks are trying to say, how can we sustain this? How can we move forward with automation better as a team effort? All right, so let's just jump into then, after that information, what I said in 2000 would be bigger in 2019, see how close I got, and then see where I think it's going to go in 2020. So the first thing to me, which was kind of shocking, if you followed Selenium ID for any amount of time, you know that I think in 2017, Firefox 5, I think version 5.5 was the last supported version of Selenium. And so Selenium was basically dead, right? No one was supporting Selenium IDE. Everyone said Selenium IDE was a bad idea. Don't use it. It's dead. And I agreed with them. I said, okay, yeah, you shouldn't be using it. But then I heard that folks were reviving it and bringing it back from the dead. And so at the end of 2018, I believe they released a new version. Folks like Dave Heffner, probably everyone here, if you do automation, know who Dave Heffner is. He worked on a new implementation of Selenium, which is, it took a lot of what used to be the bad practices of Selenium and updated this to be a more modern type of experience. So it works with CI/CD systems. It has extra functionality to help you. So when you are doing this record and playback, it's not as brittle as it used to be. And so this was the first thing that kind of caught my eye. And as I talked to more and more people, and more solutions, people were talking about their Selenium IDEs, their IDEs that we use to record and then do a playback. And back in the day, this was considered a really bad idea. And I think it's still, in general, probably not optimal, but there are situations where you could now use a recorder, and they're smart enough to know that, hey, okay, here's an element ID that I'm using, name, right? But there are 5 other ways I can identify this element. So when I run, if I don't find that element, I can use these other 4 ways. So before, when you used Selenium ID, it was really kind of brittle, where if you used an ID and it didn't appear, it would just die. And it wasn't as robust as this newer version. So this version really is created to be more robust, has control flow, feedback locators, plugins that you can create. You can data drive your test, and you can do a lot of things that you normally couldn't do with the older Selenium. So this isn't a promotion for Selenium IDE. This was just to say, wow, record and playback. This is something that I did in 1999. We're going back to 1999, but it seems like a new push now towards these record and playback. But now, with the promise of AI and machine learning, and what we've learned over the last 20 years of what made record and playback so brittle, I think there may be some actual use cases for this, especially if you have some quick tests that you need to get created really quick to run in CI. This is a good solution. Also, this is almost like a wrapper on top of Selenium. So it's like you just download a application and you have a built-in do everything you can out of the box type of thing. So that's one thing I saw in 2019, and I said, oh, this might be a trend now. And sure enough, like I said, I interviewed a bunch of people. I spoke to people from different companies I've never heard about before, like Boozing, a company called Oxygen, Test Project, ExcelQ. All these companies have this record and playback functionality. And I think that over time, it's going to be more of a norm. And it's not going to replace programming. It's not going to replace programming best practices. But I think that we're at the point now where it can help you create maybe a skeleton of a test. And it has built-in functionality to help you to make your tests more reliable as you go forward. So a lot of things coming out, a lot of new functionality, a lot of new companies, and all of them, like I said, that I've been speaking with, have this type of record and playback. So just really interesting development. If in 2000 that was the rage, and then it died off in 2005. To me, it died off 2010, and then all of a sudden it's making a comeback. So it's like a swing back and forth. And I think as the promise of AI, machine learning really mature, I think this become more and more viable option for a lot of folks. So another reason why I think these record and playback tools are making a comeback is, as you saw in the surveys earlier on, a lot of people are struggling with maintenance of automated tests, right? Automated tests have always been hard to maintain, and I've struggled with automation being reliable for, once again, like almost 20 years. So it's not anything new, but I think we're at the point now where vendors and open source providers are listening, and they're creating tests they're creating solutions to help actually finally address this type of need. So one of my predictions for 2019 was more solutions would be available that make automation easier to maintain, which is probably one of the two things that I think kill most automation efforts is maintenance, and two is flakiness, usually due to timing, so synchronization issues. So Dan Belcher, he's one of the founders of Mabel. Once again, I'm not promoting these companies. These are just folks that I've spoken with, and they speak with other companies, and so they have good insight into the environment in general. And so they did a survey before they decided on, hey, we want to create a solution. What should we do? And they spoke with 100 companies, and the most frequent complaint was they had issues maintaining and creating test automation and finding test automation engineers. So that was the number one struggle. So if you can make it easier to create an automation script, right? If you can make it so it's more easy to maintain, more reliable, more companies I think would get buy-in to automation, and it would be able to automate the things that can be automated much easier. And so that's why I think you're seeing a lot of these Selenium IDE type of solutions. And here's an example of what I was speaking about with some of these solutions. Once again, this is one implementation. This is Selenium IDE, but all these other tools I've been seeing are doing something similar. So now with Selenium IDE is when you record a script, it records maybe the first locator that you want to use. So say it's the name. But say for some reason the name changes. Without you doing anything, it already picked up 5 other ways you can identify that particular element. So when you run this script, if it doesn't find the name, it says, oh, I already have this bank of 6 other ways to find this element. Let me use that, right? So if something changes, it can go ahead, and so it doesn't give you a false positive. So this is a big time saver, right? Because now, rather than you having to worry about, oh, they changed the name, I need to go into my scripts, update all my scripts to all the names, it has this semi-intelligence to know, wait a minute, okay, I can't find the name, but maybe I can find the CSS locator, right? And this is done all for you without you doing anything. So out of the box, do a recording, you get this extra benefit. And other tools, I guess this is an open source solution. A lot of things like Testum, I think does something similar where if it doesn't find an element, it's able to work around it. I think those other solutions use more of a visual image type of comparison to say, hey, I know this element ID changed, but I knew it used to be near these type of fields. and using that kind of visual recognition, it's able to fix itself. So this is the type of thing I see in 2019. It definitely happened. In 2020, for sure. I just think this is definitely going to be the norm. So another thing I've seen a lot of, this is Larry Goddard. He's from the UK. I spoke to him on my Test Guild automation podcast. This is another reason why people use frameworks like WebDriver IO. So Selenium's awesome, right? Selenium, though, is not, if you think about it, isn't an automation solution, right? It's an API that helps you drive a browser as if it's a real user. That's what it is, right? But of course, it lends itself to be an awesome solution to actually automate your tests, but it's not an automation solution. You know, you need to create all this scaffolding around it, reporting, all this functionality that it doesn't come with, right? So I think what a lot of teams are doing to make this stuff more maintainable, reliable, is they're using these solutions that act like wrappers on top of Selenium. So I don't know if you ever use like Serenity. Serenity acts like a wrapper on top of Selenium. WebDriver IO acts like a wrapper on top of Selenium. And what I mean by a wrapper is that, you know, Selenium is the underlying technology that does the driving of the browser, but there's a layer on top that takes care of all these other things that if you're using Selenium out of the box, like, oh, I'm gonna create my own framework using Selenium, you're gonna have to implement yourself, right? And so you're gonna have to have some sort of coding expertise, and you have to be a pretty good coder, because if you start using it across teams, in your teams, right, you know, you have to make it so it's really easy to maintain. And I'll be honest, a lot of people don't necessarily have that skill or even want to spend their time on that skill. So using these solutions like WebDriver IO have these awesome other functionality baked in. And so for example, WebDriver IO has this concept of where you don't have to tell it the element. You do driver.click, and it will decide in the background without you knowing what element's the best one to use to find that particular locator, right? So it does a lot of cool things. It also helps you with synchronization, where you don't have to worry now about, oh, let me wait 10 minutes, within 10 minutes for this thing to appear. A lot of these frameworks also take care of that for you. So once again, one of the big things with automation making them flaky is that there's a lot of timeouts, right? They're not waiting long enough, or the DOM's refreshing, and so it's trying to act on an element that's not available yet, or a field that's not visible yet. And so that causes a lot of flakiness. But with a lot of these solutions now, especially what I saw this year and even more next year in 2020, is this kind of baked in semi-intelligence, right? They're not full blown, you know, it's going to write it for you, but it has some sort of kind of intelligence, right? Where it's able to say, all right, I know this element, it needs to appear, I'll take care of that for you. So it's less things you need to worry about. And this is definitely something I've been seeing as I speak with more and more folks on my podcast, and also something I definitely would see companies providing more for in 2020. So this is represents, you know, weights. So a lot of, like I said, a lot of automation, a lot of times they feel is because you don't have a proper synchronization framework in place, or method in place, and a lot of these solutions take care of that for you. Here's an example, another one. Once again, I'm not promoting tools, I'm just giving you examples. This is one, Selenoid, pretty cool. I just spoke to Hima Bindu Pateti, and she told me about a framework she created within Selenoid that it handles all the synchronizations for her, and also the syntax is very readable, right? So that's another benefit. A lot of people think, who cares about readability? But you know, it's easy to create a test, but even if you create a test, I bet you any money, if you go back and look at that test a year from now, if you don't make it readable, even you, if you created that test, would be like, okay, what's it doing? And any time of mental activity you're spending on these tests is time wasted. So readability is huge. And also, if a test fails, like, you don't want to have to step through a test to know what's going on in order to know why it failed. If you have well-named methods, well-named functions, if it's easy to read, it's going to help you debug quicker. The quicker you can debug, the quicker you can fix, the quicker you can move on with your life. So readability is a huge part of maintenance and making tests more reliable. And that's a trend I've seen more and more of, this push towards making the syntax easier. And also making a syntax easier means you don't have to be a rocket scientist to create a script, right? You don't have to do all this extra boilerplate code that if you do with Java, you have to create all this extra boilerplate code. With Selenide, it takes care of all that for you and just makes it a lot easier to create tests and automation. So you don't have to worry about it. In the end, we're all still testers, right? We're not, and our number one priority is to test, not necessarily create, tons and tons of code and have to worry about this. If you can implement a framework that exists that takes care of that for you, I don't know why more people aren't doing this. So I see this as a bigger trend. All these tools that are coming out take care of all these things that are probably making your test flaky if you're just using Selenium out of the box. So big trend, definitely saw it growing in 2019 and something definitely in 2020. Here's another solution. I just spoke to the creator of this yesterday on my podcast. It's not released yet. Once again, this solution, Smash Test, is a language that's used to help you create tests really quickly. It also does some cool things where it treats tests as a tree view, and it handles all these different permutations for you. So like all these providers that are coming out are addressing things that people blame Selenium for, but it's not Selenium's fault. It's usually the person programming their framework around Selenium that causes the issue. So a lot of these tools that are coming out use Selenium under the covers, but it provides all this extra cool functionality that's going to help you make your tests more reliable, more maintainable. So definitely a trend I see going forward. Newer technologies coming out, people spending their time on open source solutions like Smash Test, once again, are putting it in the areas where people said they were struggling with in my survey. So I get a feeling for this is definitely a trend we'll see more of, and a really good trend. So definitely check out some of these solutions. I highly recommend, if you don't already have a framework, to try a solution that already exists. I don't have a link here, but I have a blog post that has over 51 open source, not open source, some of them are paid solutions, but 51 automation frameworks. There's a bunch more. So why create one from scratch when you can, I'm not judging you or thinking you're not a great developer. Maybe you are, but even just to save time, even if you are the best developer in the world, why not leverage an existing framework? So that's definitely a trend I see going forward. Another trend is this triaging, right? So even if you have tests that are, small test suite, you're going to get failures, right? I have tests like 10,000, $2,000 test cases at the company I work for, and if you have a failure rate of even 5%, that's still a lot of tests you need to triage. And because the tests run nightly, they run constantly on every check-in, you need to be able to tell right away, okay, why is it failing? And so tools I think that'll be entering the market are going to start helping more with the triage. This is an open source solution called reportportal.io. And what this will do over time is if you tell it, this test is a known defect, here's the defect number. When that test fails again, it'll automatically assign it as, yes, this is a known defect. And so when you log in, your team members log in, they won't waste time on an issue that's a known defect. So a lot of times people, just keeping track of why a test is failing. So if you're just using Selenium out of the box, it's not easy to know if you're not tagging it correctly, if you don't have a good solution on the back end how to handle failed tests. This will help you tag them and have teams come in and be able to know and triage and say, okay, these groups of tests are actual failures, right? They're doing an assertion and they're saying, I'm looking for this value is not found. These are most likely where I should spend my time first, and then it buckets them for you. And then over time, using an algorithm it has behind the scenes, machine learning, it's able to know whether or not something's a real error, whether it's a real issue, or whether you should be looking at it right away. So another great trend, I think, going forward, a lot of people are building this themselves with tools like Kibana, the Elk Stack, Grafana, but I think this actually uses Elk Stack behind the scenes. Reportportal.io, definitely check it out. I think a lot more companies probably will be leveraging this in the future for sure. So that's a trend I said in 2019, something I definitely have been seeing more of, and I've definitely seen more people doing. Once again, they're trying to create their own dashboarding solutions that does something similar to what this already does. So I would definitely highly check out an existing tool first before creating your own. And then if it doesn't have the functionality, then look into it. But this will save you a lot of time. So trend I've seen, and I'd love to know your opinion if you've seen anything similar, and that is open source versus vendor. So once again, I'm older, right? As you probably could tell when I'm on camera, have that white gray beard. Is that back in the day, it used to just be vendor tools, right? That's all it was. It was vendor, and that's just was the nature of it. Then came along Selenium and these open source solutions, and then people are like, vendors. I don't need vendors. I could go all open source, right? And that's cool. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think you should use whatever tool works for you, whether it's paid or open source. But that's a different rant. But with AI, these AI type solutions that are coming out, a lot of them are vendor based, and also a lot of them don't even use Selenium behind the scenes. So a lot of them are paid things, and I said that's going to be a trend in 2019. Newer technologies that are coming out eventually they're going to be vendor based, but over time they probably would make the transition to being open source solutions for it. But I haven't seen any large move towards AI based automation solutions that are open source. But I did see Report Portal, which is kind of an AI machine learning type thing. So I'm kind of 50-50 on where this is going to go. I think it's probably going to still start with the vendors and then trickle down to open source. And here's Jason Arbon. Jason Arbon used to work at Google. He wrote a really great book on how Google tests software. Ended 2018, he came out with an open source AI classification plugin for Appium. So there are people in the industry that are working on open source solutions. So that's hopefully a trend we'll see more and more of. So in 2020, I think we'll start seeing more and more companies, more and more open source solutions trickling out these type of open source AI-based solutions, which I think is going to be definitely a good thing for the industry. And once again, Jason Arbon introduced it maybe 2 months ago, something called Open Test Data. And so that helps you leverage existing artifacts to help you jumpstart your testing platform to avoid reinventing the wheel. So this is great about any type of framework. So just showing you that a lot of the vendors coming out are paid solutions, but they do have some that are starting to work on more open source ones that do leverage AI machine learning for you. So really good development there for sure. So this is something I thought we'd see more of, and we kind of did see it with Selenium, AI test automation assistance, where I don't think Selenium is using any type of AI-based technology in the background. It has this semi-intelligence, as we saw earlier, where it's able to say, okay, this element's not available, this locator's not available, here are these other ways I can identify that to help find that field. So I thought we'd see more of this in 2019. I haven't seen a lot of it, but once again, it's because I think a lot of these are baked into the vendor tools right now. And so for the few people that kind of freaked out by machine learning, I just thought this was a great quote by Jason Arbon that ultimately, we want the machine to do the drudgery of surfacing up these insights that are interesting, right, or have predictions. So that's what's great about machine learning and AI, especially if you're doing things with like performance testing, right? Performance testing would be perfect for figuring out all these log files. I have a performance hit, my CPU spiking here, but you're able to triage and get all these logs together and say, okay, it's happening because this SQL statement here is taking a long time. So that's where machine learning, I think, really going to benefit testers. Is not necessarily doing things that we can do for ourselves, but more doing things we couldn't do even if we wanted to, right? Even if right now, once again, did performance testing 1999, looking at all the logs and be able to do that, I could not do manually as a human, right? But leveraging these tools will help us do this. So Stephen has a question. He wants to know, what are the names of the test dashboards that were mentioned? So the first one that is you can download and use right away is reportportal.io, reportportal.io. And that is built for testers, by testers, and has baked in all the things you're going to need when you're running your automated tests. The other solutions for dashboards aren't necessarily for testing dashboards. You have Elasticsearch, or they call it the ELK stack. So that's one of them. Another one is Grafana. Maybe I'll send these names to Paul after, and he could send it out in an email blast. But Stephen, hopefully that answers your questions. But if you have any questions, just send me an email at joe at testguild.com, and I'll send that out to you. Someone mentioned that solenoid is brilliant. I agree. I just heard about it recently by Hema, but she seemed to love it. So good stuff. Okay, so on we go. Once again, these are not pitches for vendors. This is just letting you know how I get these insights. This is Aran Sher from Sea Lights. He had a great quote where what's great about AI machine learning is it's able to manage quality through data analytics. And this is a great point because, what I kind of miss about vendors, this is kind of probably not cool to say, is I kind of liked having WinRunner and QTP with test director, because I could say this test is associated with this requirement and this suite of tests. You can do that with Selenium, but you have to, the way we use Cucumber with tagging, it's not as elegant, and it's really hard to know that when someone checks in code for based on that code change, what tests do I really need to run? And I hate, and once again, I don't like saying just run everything, run all your tests everywhere, all the time for every code check-in. If you're doing patches and you need to release software quickly to yourself, you can't just run all your tests because a lot of times you're going to get false positives. And you don't necessarily know this test failed, the login test failed, but the code check-in was for a patient search, it has nothing to do with login. So you're wasting a lot of time. So I think this is a trend we're definitely going to see more of, and I look forward to it, where we can use these analytics we gather over time and know that when someone checks in code A, that I just need to run tests 1, 5, and 6, right? To me, that would be ultimate. And I know some people have opposite views of that. They just say run everything, but to me, I'd rather say you checked in code A, I know automatically that here are the 3 tests I should run to cover that code change. To me, that gives feedback quicker to your developers. The quicker you get feedback to your developers, the quicker you can get them to make changes before a bug is introduced to your users and causes more and more money the later it's introduced in the software development lifecycle. So, and they actually, I think, just came out with something called Smart Test Execution, which does just that. So I said that's something that definitely someone's going to work on, and they released something recently where it does tell you the minimum amount of tests you need to execute based on your check-in for code. So to me, this is huge, big time saver. I think I dig that for sure. And this is something I think we'll see more of. And as I mentioned, performance testing for sure. I know a lot of people are skeptical about AI and machine learning, but machine learning is brilliant for all the data that's produced when you're doing a performance test, all the log files, all the graphs that are generated for all the monitors that you're monitoring. And a lot of companies actually have started introducing AI type technologies. These big companies, Dynatrace, AppDynamics. I was speaking with Scott Moore, who's a big advocate of performance testing. He was speaking to James Pulley, and I guess NASA has some kind of cool technology that's able to do stuff with their performance to know, give them insights onto what's going on automatically. So I think that's really a huge benefit for sure. And as I said, Applitools, Dave Heffner has been working on it, and he could see the potential for some sort of machine learning in future versions. So that's kind of cool. All right, automation test tool diversity. Once again, here's a topic I can get in trouble with. People tend to fall in love with, I don't know why they fall in love with tools. Actually, I'm guilty. I loved WinRunner. I could do anything with WinRunner, right? But WinRunner was replaced. It went away. So that love was gone. I was heartbroken. And so you shouldn't fall in love with test tools. And so this is not a knock against any tool. I'm not saying one tool is better than the other, but a lot of folks aren't happy with Selenium, right? For whatever reason, good or bad. Not saying Selenium is bad, but they come up with solutions that don't use Selenium behind the scenes. This is something I've seen with end of 2018, definitely in 2019. We'll definitely see more of in 2020. Like tools like Cypress.io, things like Boozang that I talked about earlier came out with a solution. They don't use Selenium behind the scenes and Mabel. So I'm a big believer in there is not one right tool. It's the right tool that's good for your team, that works for your team. So that's a trend I saw in 2018 going into 2019. And I've been hearing more and more people using Cypress.io, which is not Selenium. So definitely a trend I see going forward. And here are a few of them that I mentioned. So just let me go back really quick. Chris Trimper mentioned something about performance testing. In regards to performance testing, where does the line start to converge with functional test automation and performance testing to get real deal user experience measures? Well, Chris, one thing I could think of is, I don't have it on my slide, is, I don't remember the name of it. I'd have to look it up. Flood.io has a tool that uses real browsers to do performance testing. So it's able to run performance tests using real browsers. So in essence, it kind of emulates a real user type of experience. Also, Jonathan Wright, I was speaking to him the other day, and he was talking about something about cognitive learning that he's doing with models. And it's able to know based on performance as you're running a test that this one user test can be scaled up to a performance test. So I definitely see performance testing, one user type test, especially if you're using a lot of Java on the front end, a lot of technology coming out that's able to emulate a user from a real user perspective on a front end. Definitely a trend going forward. So that's a good point, Chris. Definitely think we'll see more of that for sure.
Hey, I can help you out with some questions here. There were a couple more if you're all right with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Allison asks, will you be mentioning any Jenkins plugins? Some of the tools you're talking about, I'd like to use in Jenkins, especially the reporting tools.
Yeah, so what's great about them is most all of them have a command line interface. So it's to implement with any CI, it doesn't matter if it's Jenkins or not. You usually don't even need a plugin per se. You just need to know the command that you pass in your pipeline. So all these tools I mentioned, all are compatible with CI/CD and Jenkins. It's just a matter of passing the right command line options, and it knows what to do with that for sure.
What are your, and someone else mentioned, if you've trained your developers, you were talking about Selenium IDE and some of the fallback locators.
Yeah.
And they were saying if you've trained your developers to write their IDs, then you don't need any of that kind of stuff. Do you have thoughts about that? Do you have preferences?
Wow. That's nice. Sure. Ideally, yes, that would be great. I mean, tell me the name of your company. I'd like to apply there because I don't see that, and most people I talk to don't see that. That is awesome if you do that. You're the man. You're the person, not the man. That's awesome. You're the developer. That's great. That's awesome that you're able to do that. But no, I definitely. I mean, ideal. That's a lot of these things are ideal. Ideally, your developers would be writing tests to be their code to be testable, and you wouldn't have to worry about half the things we worry about. But it's a lot of people struggle with it, and ideally, yes, a developer would be able to do it. But even with the developer, them being on board with all the things they have as part of the definition of done and be able to get things done, if you start having it do things for you automatically, it just saves everyone time, even your developers. So.
Yeah, and it's a real struggle. I mean, you're doing this, you're looking at across the industry and you're looking at all kinds of folks. It's really easy to think about the world you live in, the world an individual that I live in, my client or my company that I work for. And when you're doing what you do and what I do, we see different folks all the time. And so it may be a little more obvious that one thing is more likely to be the case than the other, but you certainly have to focus on where you are. You have to focus on what's practical and what's more applicable to more folks with what you're doing.
Yep.
Jim H, we all know him. I don't say last names on here for people, but Jim asks, do you see a problem with too many tools out there right now?
Yeah, well, it's a good point. There are a lot of tools that do a lot of similar things, so I think it adds a lot of confusion. And it's just by our nature, for some reason, as engineers, we always want to create our own frameworks, maybe to do a tweak to something that a current one doesn't have, or we don't have time to read the documentation on an existing framework. So I definitely see a problem with too many tools for sure. Yes.
And just chiming in here, Joe, it seems like that's been the case for a long, long time. I remember years ago sitting down trying to make a list of all the tools I could find, and I've done it multiple times, and then trying to find someone else who had already done it, and every list I found was out of date. So I
Yeah,
don't think that's new, but I do think that the market and the technological kind of ecology fights for that. They fight for the best tools, and the best tools survive, or the most popular ones do. Do you have thoughts about that?
I guess I'm kind of a pessimist that I should think of better natures, but I think a lot of people are making a money grab in in the sense that the test space is really hot. You see a lot of these companies come out, they throw AI, machine learning next to them. All of a sudden, they're getting funding for $2 million, $5 million, right? I think a lot of this, maybe I'm wrong, a lot of companies are just jumping in, just trying to make a money grab. Yeah, we have a new tool, it's AI, it's machine learning. So maybe that's a little negative, but that's what I've been saying.
Did you want a couple more questions before you move on, or are you
Yeah,
good?
let me finish up really quick, and then we'll
Sure.
get back to the question. So here's a term I thought I'd hear more of in 2019. I didn't. I don't think I heard anyone say continuous testing. Um, but it is something that I think maybe it's just what you do in DevOps. So that's probably why automation vendor madness. So vendors being acquiring under vendors. And the point of all this, and you'll see soon, is Sauce Labs acquired Screener in April. Um, Tricentis acquired Test Project. So I said in 2000 to 2019 we'd see more mergers. This is what we saw in 2019, more mergers. So Tricentis is acquiring Test Project, SmartPair acquiring Cucumber, they acquired BitBar. Why should you care? I think you should care as a tester because there is money. And if there's money, there's jobs. And if there's jobs and you're a tester, it's good. So for some reason, there is a big push for testing solutions. Money is in this space. It's a good time to be a tester. Also, I'd like to know people's opinion here. Actually, we're running out of time, but besides mergers of tools, it's like mergers of people. So if you look at some of these companies like Sauce Labs or Apply Tools, they have like dream teams of like of testers that used to be independent are now working for vendors. So could be bad, could be good, but that is a trend I've been seeing more of. And what I said in 2018, beginning of 2019, you will not be replaced by AI. This was completely true. I did an AI challenge a few weeks ago and get some feedback from folks to download an AI tool and try it. And it's a mixed bag, 50-50, and doesn't even do what they expected to do. So you will not be replaced by an AI tool anytime soon. So let's go by here really quick. It doesn't have much value. And vendor dream teams, as I mentioned. And just a quick plug. I'll keep this up for the questions, Paul.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. We are running out of time. We got a few minutes here for questions, and there are a bunch of them here in the hopper. So let me try to look through this a little bit. Tell us a little bit about RPA. Do you know anything about RPA and where that's going?
I know a little bit about it. I don't know enough about it really to speak about it. I have it on my list of topics that I need to get on. This is how I learn as I get older. One of the reasons why I created a podcast to keep me hip is to talk to people. So it is on my wish list. I don't have much on it. It's kind of like a buzzword as well, but from what I heard, but it is definitely something I've been hearing more and more of.
Yeah, and it's always hard when somebody asks you about something that you haven't really gotten involved in yet on one of these things. You did that to me in a podcast once,
Really?
but
Like
it
you never
happens,
know.
and you got to be used to it. You got to be ready for it, and then you got to go research so you're not left blank the next time. Um, Allison asked, what's the best way for a company to evaluate a tool? So we're talking about tools here, lots of different things that people can use. You've got some that you like, so clearly you've evaluated them. What are some of the best ways that folks can evaluate tools?
Big believer in a 2-week proof of concept. Treat it just like a normal sprint. You choose maybe 2 or 3 tools. You run it through your whole development lifecycle like you normally would with your team. Have your team members try it out because a lot of times if you're a tester, you're like, oh, this is great. I chose this tool. You bring it to your developers. They're like, nah, I don't like it, or it's not going to work with our our life cycle. So you want to throw it through a 2-week sprint through your normal channels with your developers, your normal team using it, and see which one in the end actually wins out. Because like I said, there is not one tool that's right for each one. So I think that would be a big help if you do a POC before you commit.
I had a couple questions here about specific tools or specific stacks. So one that I've seen come up several times in the questions is about JavaScript. So do you have certain JavaScript frameworks that you like or certain tools in JavaScript that you like? The other one is about Visual Studio.
This Visual Studio is always tough, but let's go to the JavaScript one because that's easier. JavaScript, WebDriver IO, people seem to love WebDriver IO. So if you're using JavaScript, I would definitely look at that. Also Cypress, developers, especially if you're developer centric. JavaScript, Cypress, it's a match made in heaven. People love it. So if you're more developer centric, I would check that out. If you're more tester centric, I would definitely check out WebDriver IO for JavaScript.
And as I can speak to a little bit of the Microsoft question, I know that it mentioned in the question coded UI, and coded UI is end of life. It hasn't been announced very big, but if you look in the documentations, they started suggesting using WebDriver as a replacement for coded UI. So they haven't done anything new with that product in a very long time, is my experience. So probably a little bit risky to continue down the road of coded UI right now. A couple others.
Where you're testing. So if it's a browser, definitely I would use Selenium because you could just use the .NET language bindings. But if you're doing like a thick client application, WPF, you could always look at the White framework. It's still older, but it still works. I know companies that use that for sure.
And I've heard a lot about White as well. Lawrence asks, are organizations trying and expecting to find one tool that does it all, or is fitting many tools together the approach?
I think ideally they're looking for one tool that does it all, but like you said, they don't exist. So if you do choose a tool, that's a great point. You want to make sure that you're able to interact with it with your other tools. So make sure it has a strong API. If it has an API, then you should be able to glue this together. What's great about Jenkins and things like that is you can just call these all together with the APIs and then create a solution. That's what we do a lot of. We call our using Maven, we call our test scripts, and we can call report portal and call some crazy Python scripts I create that do other things in the background. So I think that's a good way to glue everything together. But yeah, definitely, I think ideally they're looking for one solution if they could to make things simple, but there's so many solutions that it's probably not feasible.
Yeah, I think you must have mentioned 40 tools on this program. I mean, that's just a small sampling. Those are the better ones that you're willing to talk about, or the ones that people brought up that we're willing to comment on. That's a small sampling, folks. It is a huge, huge ecosystem of tools and options out there, and even trying to classify them is very difficult, has been my experience. So we're closing up here. Joe, did you want to leave us with anything? You want to leave us with a certain idea or thought before we see who won the gift card?
I just tell you it's a good time to be a tester. I think it's awesome. I love tools and technologies, and my mission, as I said earlier, is to help you succeed with automation awesomeness. So that's either automation, performance, or security testing. So definitely check out testguild.com. I started a new podcast on performance testing. Let me know your thoughts on it. Send me an email at joe@testguild.com. Always looking for feedback to make things better to help you succeed with your automation efforts.
That's awesome. I'm so happy you're here. Why don't you stick around and let's see who wins this, okay?
Cool, let's do it.
All right, so who is going to win? There's the drum roll. I hope you guys can hear that. The drum roll, and it is Allison M. Allison, thanks for being here today. Allison M will be our winner of our $50 gift card, and that will come through the email to you. The email. I sound like I live in 2000. The email. So look, if you have test automation challenges, we just heard Joe talking about this, that he had surveyed hundreds and hundreds of folks over time, and each year he finds that automation is one of their biggest challenges. If you're one of those folks, if it's the strategy, if it's the tool selection, if it's how to evaluate things, if it's where to get people, hint, hint, give us a yell. So we do a free 1-hour consultation to talk through those kinds of things. Many times 1 hour is plenty of time to get you an answer, or sometimes it's an invitation to start engaging and working together. We can definitely help you with your automation struggles. So those are my contact information. Beaufort Fairmont is here to help you guys with that. Once again, training, consultation, and dedicated experts. So really happy to have everyone here. Thank you so much for being here, Joe. I've enjoyed it. This has been a fun session. Awesome. And we will see everybody next time. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, everyone.